At the company celebration, after I'd sold my home of 43 years and given my son my life savings, he called me on stage. He gave me a single, cheap, silk flower. Immediately after, he praised his mother-in-law and presented her with a $7,000 diamond ring. I just smiled, clutching that fake flower. But my silence held a promise of what was to come. You won't believe what happened next. Please like, share, and let us know where you are listening from. The dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight piercing the drawn blinds, illuminating the bare floorboards where my life used to be. At 64, I had just signed away the last vestiges of my past. My house, my home for 43 years, was no longer mine. Each empty room echoed with a phantom chorus of memories. Ethan's first steps in the living room, the aroma of his favorite cookies baking in the kitchen, the late-night talks on the porch swing after Arthur had left, leaving me to raise our son alone. It wasn't just a house. It was the crucible of my resilience, the silent witness to every triumph and heartache of my single motherhood. Now, it was gone, traded for a significant sum, most of which was about to embark on a new journey. My life savings, a modest $50,000, meticulously built from years of careful budgeting and sacrifice, now sat in my bank account. A number on a screen. This money wasn't for a retirement cruise or a quiet cottage by the sea. It was for Ethan, for Brooks Construction. The business his father, Arthur, had started decades ago, and which Ethan now struggled to keep afloat. He'd called me a few weeks prior, his voice tight with stress, hinting at cash flow issues, crucial investments needed to secure new contracts. My heart, as always, went out to my son. I saw an opportunity not just to help him, but to reconnect with a legacy, a part of our family history. A week later, I drove to Ethan's office. A bustling, glass-fronted building that felt entirely too modern for the quaint, brick-and-mortar image I had of Brooks Construction. The scent of fresh paint and new carpet filled the air. Inside, Ethan was hunched over a large drafting table, his brow furrowed, surrounded by young, energetic employees I didn't recognize. He looked up, startled, as I approached. A quick smile, almost an afterthought, touched his lips. "Mom? What a surprise. I thought you were just going to wire it." His tone was polite but dismissive, his gaze already drifting back to the blueprints. He didn't rise. I held out the crisp, white envelope containing the check. My carefully prepared speech about family legacy and investment dying on my lips. I wanted to bring it myself. Ethan, to see you. To be part of it. He took the envelope, barely glancing at it before setting it on the corner of the table. No hug, no warm embrace, no heartfelt thanks for the monumental sacrifice I'd just made. A wire transfer would have been easier, honestly, he murmured, picking up a pen and making a quick notation on a document. It was as if I'd handed him a utility bill, not the culmination of my life's work. The lack of emotion, the casual acceptance, felt like a small, sharp sting. I tried to push past the hurt, to offer more. I could help out, with the paperwork, or even organizing. I've got plenty of time now. I gestured vaguely, imagining myself bringing some order to the stacks of papers on nearby desks. Ethan finally looked up, a slightly patronizing smile on his face. "Mom, that's sweet of you, really. But Victoria has everything under control. Her MBA is proving invaluable. We're moving towards professional management now, streamlining things. It's all about efficiency." He didn't mean it unkindly, but the words felt like a brick wall between us, defining me as an amateur, an outsider. I nodded, a forced smile on my face. Pushed aside, I thought. But then, I rationalized it away. As mothers often do, he's growing, he's busy, he has his own life, his own family now. It's normal for sons to outgrow their mother's direct involvement. He didn't need me to type invoices or organize files. He just needed the capital. And I had provided that. That was my role now, the silent partner, the benefactor. 3 weeks later, the annual Brooks Construction celebration was upon us. I dressed carefully, choosing a dress I hadn't worn in years, feeling a flicker of excitement. Surely, at an event like this, where the whole company would be present, Ethan would publicly acknowledge my investment, my commitment to his future, perhaps a small speech, a mention of how integral family support was. I imagined the warmth, the pride, the long-overdue hug. The banquet hall buzzed with cheerful chatter. Ethan, looking handsome and successful, moved through the crowd, greeting employees and clients. Eventually, the lights dimmed, and he took the stage, microphone in hand. He spoke eloquently about the company's growth, its future. Then, he paused, his eyes sweeping the room until they met mine. My heart fluttered, and finally, he announced, his voice carrying through the speakers, "I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone truly special, someone whose unwavering support has been a cornerstone for me, personally and professionally. My mother, Eleanor Brooks. Mom, would you please come up here?" A wave of applause, polite but genuine, followed me as I made my way to the stage. My cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and nerves. This was it, the recognition I had quietly yearned for. Ethan met me with a brief, almost perfunctory, hug. Then, he reached for something behind the podium. He pulled out a single, perfectly formed rose. It was a beautiful shade of peach, its petals soft and delicate. But as he handed it to me, I felt its telltale rigidity. It was silk. A $5 artificial flower. My smile faltered, but I quickly recovered. "It's beautiful, Ethan," I managed, my voice catching. A tremor I hoped no one else noticed. He thanked me again, a quick, impersonal nod, and gently guided me back to my seat, the fake flower clutched in my hand. I was still trying to process the gesture, to find a deeper meaning in the silk, when Ethan's voice boomed again. "And now, I'd like to bring another extraordinary woman to the stage, someone who, in recent months, has brought invaluable wisdom and guidance to Brooks Construction, helping us navigate critical decisions and forge a new path forward. Please welcome Victoria's wonderful mother, Sylvia Hayes." More enthusiastic applause erupted, much louder than before. Sylvia, Victoria's impeccably dressed, sharp-eyed mother, glided onto the stage with an air of sophisticated confidence. Ethan greeted her with a warm, genuine embrace. A stark contrast to his earlier interaction with me. He spoke at length about her brilliant insights and strategic counsel. Then, with a flourish, he presented her with a small, velvet box. "Sylvia, as a small token of our immense gratitude, please accept this friendship ring, a symbol of the invaluable bond you've formed with our company." Sylvia opened the box, revealing a dazzling diamond ring that glittered under the spotlights. $7,000, I knew instantly, was the retail price for a piece like that. She beamed, accepting the ring with a graceful nod, a genuine, heartfelt thanks. I sat there, stunned, the cheap silk flower feeling heavy and brittle in my trembling hand. The applause for Sylvia thundered around me, mocking the polite patter that had accompanied my own brief moment in the spotlight. My $50,000 for a plastic rose. Her invaluable wisdom for a diamond. In that moment, surrounded by laughing faces and clinking glasses, I felt old, tired, invisible. The silk flower wasn't a token of appreciation. It was a clear message. I was disposable, a relic. Then, through the haze of my shock and hurt, my eyes fell upon a familiar figure across the room. George Fletcher, my attorney, stood by the bar, chatting amicably with a group of men. A strange clarity cut through my pain, sharp and precise. A new thought, cold and determined, began to form in the quiet corners of my mind. The drive home from the Brooks Construction celebration was a blur of streetlights and the angry thrum of my own pulse. My hands, still clutching the wretched silk flower, trembled on the steering wheel. Each shift of the gear stick sent a fresh wave of humiliation through me. $5, a fake rose, bought from a craft store, perhaps meant to symbolize, what? My diminished value? My artificial presence in his life? The diamond ring on Sylvia Hayes' finger sparkled in my mind's eye. A cold, hard contrast to the plastic petals I now held. It mocked me with its genuine brilliance, a testament to the value Ethan placed on his mother-in-law's wisdom over my life's sacrifices. I pulled into the parking lot of the temporary apartment complex, a nondescript building a few towns over from my old neighborhood. My house, the one I had just sold, the one filled with 43 years of my life, was no longer mine. This small, impersonal space was my new reality. A quiet echo of the emptiness that had settled in my heart. As I unlocked the door, the silence inside was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. It was in this stark, unfamiliar quiet that the memories, long suppressed, began to assert themselves with an insistent clamor. Arthur had left when Ethan was 7. I remembered the exact day, the way the late autumn sun had filtered through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, oblivious to the world shattering around me. He didn't even have the decency to say it to my face. A cold, terse note left on the counter, next to an untouched cup of coffee. I can't do this anymore, Eleanor. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? I wondered then, and still did sometimes. Sorry for the years. Sorry for Ethan. The emptiness he left behind was a physical ache, but the immediate, primal fear was for my son. That night, cradling Ethan as he drifted off to sleep, I invented a story. Daddy went away for work, sweetheart, I whispered into his soft hair, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It's a very important job, far away. But don't you worry. My love, I'm here. I'll always be here. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. That promise became the unwavering compass of my life. I found a second job, cleaning offices in the sprawling downtown towers. It meant working from 6 in the evening until midnight, after my day job at the local library. Many nights, I'd return home to find Ethan asleep on the sofa, waiting for me. I'd gently scoop his small, warm body into my arms, carrying him to the car, the scent of cleaning chemicals clinging to my clothes. The late drives home, the dark streets, the quiet hum of the engine were often the only moments of peace I knew. "Why do you work so much, Mommy?" he'd once asked, his voice thick with sleep, his little hand gripping my shirt. I remembered turning in the driver's seat, smiling despite the bone-deep exhaustion. "So you can have everything you need, my sweet boy. So you can go to college. So you can have a better life." Ethan, even as a young boy, had a remarkable mind for numbers. He'd spend hours with his abacus, then later, with complex puzzles and logic games. His teachers often remarked on his intuitive grasp of business concepts, even in elementary school. I saw it too, that spark, that inherent potential. It was then I knew that his future, his education, had to be my absolute priority. To afford the specialized programs, the advanced math camps, the tutoring he needed, I took on a third job, weekend bookkeeping for a small local firm. Saturday and Sunday mornings blurred into a haze of ledgers, receipts, and endless cups of lukewarm coffee. There were days I felt like a ghost, fueled only by the dream of Ethan's future. Sleep became a luxury, a distant memory. I was constantly tired, but the thought of Ethan excelling, reaching his full potential, kept me going. When he was a teenager, seeing my exhaustion, he'd sometimes offer to get a part-time job. "No, Ethan," I'd tell him, firmly but lovingly. "Your job is to study. Your job is to focus on your future. That's all I ask." When the time came for college, Ethan received a partial scholarship to a prestigious business school. It wasn't enough, of course. The remaining tuition and living expenses were staggering. Without hesitation, I took out loans against my home, the very house I had just sold. It was the largest financial gamble of my life, but it felt less like a gamble and more like a sacred investment. "Mom," Ethan had said then, his voice earnest, his eyes full of youthful promise, "I promise I'll pay you back. Every single penny. When I'm running Dad's old company, Brooks Construction, I'll make sure you never have to worry about anything again." His words were a balm to my weary soul, a confirmation that all my sacrifices were not in vain. I trusted him, implicitly. I trusted that his gratitude, his love, would last. But then, college happened. And Victoria. She entered his life like a polished, perfectly cut diamond, reflecting a world I barely knew. From an affluent, academically distinguished family, She moved with an effortless grace that spoke of privilege and expectation. Her mother, Sylvia Hayes, was a force of nature, a woman who seemed to glide through boardrooms and charity galas with equal ease. They were a world apart from my humble, hard-working existence. I remember Victoria visiting one summer, observing my meticulous canning of homegrown tomatoes, my simple, hearty meals. "Oh, Eleanor," she'd said, a small, patronizing smile playing on her lips. "It's all so quaint, so delightfully rustic." The word quaint hung in the air, a subtle dismissal of my entire way of life, my values, my efforts. It was the first chill, the first inkling that something fundamental was shifting, that the bond with my son, forged in hardship and sacrifice, was perhaps not as unshakable as I had always believed. A new distance began to grow, subtle at first, then widening into a chasm. After Ethan and Victoria married, the subtle shifts I had felt during his college years accelerated into a palpable transformation. The weekly Sunday dinners, a cherished tradition from his childhood, became sporadic, then nearly non-existent. Excuses were always plentiful. Ethan swamped with work. "Mom," Victoria would say, her voice honeyed but firm, whenever I called, "we're just so busy with transition planning for Brooks Construction." Sometimes, I'd barely get past the first ring before she intercepted, a gatekeeper guarding access to my own son. The irony wasn't lost on me. Transition planning. For years after Arthur left, transition planning meant me, Eleanor Brooks, working 3 jobs, meticulously keeping the small company's books in order, barely keeping Brooks Construction afloat through sheer will and sleepless nights. Arthur had started it, yes, but when he left, he hadn't left a thriving enterprise. He'd left a struggling venture that I, with no formal business training, had nursed back to health, maintaining the relationships, paying the bills, ensuring the few loyal employees still had jobs. I hadn't just kept it afloat, I'd kept its heart beating. When Ethan graduated from business school, full of fresh theories and textbook knowledge, he was dismissive of my old-fashioned ways. My decades of practical, hands-on experience, the intimate knowledge of every client and every supplier, counted for nothing against Victoria's polished pronouncements on modern business practices. Her influence grew like a relentless vine, slowly choking the life out of the company's long-standing culture. She had a way of presenting her ideas that made them sound not just logical, but inevitable. "Family and business shouldn't mix, Ethan," she'd often say, her gaze sweeping over me with a calculated disdain that belied her sweet tone. "It creates blurred lines, conflicts of interest," and so, piece by painful piece, Victoria systematically dismantled the very fabric of Brooks Construction that Arthur and I had painstakingly woven together. The warmth, the sense of family that had permeated the small office, was replaced by a cold, sterile efficiency. The annual Christmas bonuses, a tradition I had fought to maintain even during the leanest years, were deemed outdated. "They incentivize complacency, Ethan," Victoria explained. As if I were a child. "Performance-based metrics are the only way forward." The company barbecues, once legendary for fostering camaraderie and loyalty, were abolished. "They create liability issues, dear," she'd announced at a family dinner. The dear, a sharp, thinly veiled barb, and quite frankly, they're not aligned with our new corporate image. I tried to adapt, to prove my worth in this new, alien landscape. I subscribed to business magazines, reading articles on corporate governance and strategic planning. Hoping to find a common language, I suggested modernizing our accounting software, streamlining client relations. Each idea, however carefully articulated, was met with the same polite, yet absolute, dismissal. "We're already working with consultants on that, Mom," Ethan would say, a familiar phrase that became a constant refrain. These consultants, I soon discovered, were none other than Victoria's former classmates, fresh out of business school, armed with theories, but devoid of the real-world experience that had built the company. The night I made the final decision to sell my house, the call from Ethan had come as a perverse confirmation of my sacrifice. He was bubbling with excitement, talking about ambitious expansion plans, a major new contract. "Mom, we need $50,000 for new equipment to secure the deal," he'd said, his voice brimming with a confidence I hadn't heard in years. "It's a huge opportunity, a game changer for Brooks Construction." I heard the plea, but also the expectation, the almost casual assumption that I would, of course, provide. And I did. I had convinced myself it was the right thing, the necessary thing. The culmination of all my years of striving for his success. Now, sitting in the quiet stillness of my rental car after the company party, the silk flower, a dead weight in my hand. The truth crystallized with a sickening precision. I wasn't a valued partner, a cornerstone of his success, or even a beloved mother whose life had been poured into his. No, I was simply another investor. And now, I had outlived my usefulness. The $50,000 had bought me a $5 silk rose and a seat at the back of the banquet hall, while Sylvia, Victoria's mother, wore the $7,000 diamond, a symbol of her continued, active, and valued wisdom. But here was the thing. That betrayal, that cold, calculated snub, wasn't a shock in the way one might expect. It was, instead, a confirmation, a chilling, absolute validation of something I had sensed for a long time, something I had been quietly, patiently preparing for longer, in fact, than they could possibly imagine. The roots of my plan were deeper than their superficial understanding of my life, intertwining with the very foundations of Brooks Construction itself. They saw an old woman with a cheap flower. I saw a chessboard and a move that was about to unfold. The morning after the disastrous celebration, a cold, clear resolve had settled over me. There was no more space for self-pity or sentimental longing, only action. I called George Fletcher, my attorney, as soon as his office opened. George was more than just a lawyer. He was an old friend of Arthur's, a man who had seen the struggles I'd faced after Arthur left, and had always offered quiet, unwavering support. He was also the only person I trusted implicitly with matters of legal significance. "George," I began, sinking into the plush leather chair opposite his imposing mahogany desk. The office felt like a sanctuary from the chaos of my emotions. "I feel like I've been sleepwalking for the past 3 years. But I'm awake now, truly, fully awake." My voice, though calm, held an undercurrent of steel that surprised even me. I recounted the events of the previous night, the words tumbling out in a rush of indignation. The dismissal, the blatant favoritism shown to Victoria's family, the complete lack of respect. I described the cheap silk flower, the glittering diamond ring, the stark contrast that had illuminated the truth with brutal clarity. George listened patiently, his wise, kind eyes never leaving my face, occasionally nodding or making a small note. When I finished, a heavy silence settled in the room. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice gentle but firm, "the question isn't how you allowed this to happen, or why they've treated you this way. The question is what we're going to do about it, now that you see it clearly." He then slid a stack of documents across the desk. "I've done some digging, as you requested, just a preliminary review of Brooks Construction's records. And what I've found might surprise you." He gestured to a yellow document, a copy of the original incorporation papers for Brooks Construction. "Eleanor, you've been listed as a co-owner of Brooks Construction from the very beginning. Arthur and you, 50-50. My breath hitched. I remember signing something, years ago, when we first started. But after he left, I just assumed." George cut me off, his expression serious. "When Arthur left, he signed over his shares to you, as part of the divorce settlement. A clean break, he called it. So, upon his departure, those shares became entirely yours. Legally, Eleanor. Ethan never actually owned the company." The words hung in the air, astounding in their implication. "No transfer ever occurred," I confirmed. My mind racing back through the years, I remembered the flurry of legal documents during the divorce, the overwhelming grief, the sheer exhaustion. I had signed whatever George, my lawyer at the time, had put in front of me. Trusting him, focusing only on survival for Ethan and me. I'd been so naive, so focused on being a mother, a provider, that I'd let Ethan assume control without a second thought, without ever checking the paperwork. It had always been Dad's old company, and then Ethan's company, never mine. And your recent $50,000 investment? George continued, pushing another document across. It's meticulously documented here. As a personal loan to the company. Interest-free. Due upon demand. He smiled faintly. Very sensible, Eleanor. Even if you didn't quite realize the full scope of your power. He paused, letting the information sink in. So, in all his youthful enthusiasm, and perhaps a touch of arrogance, Ethan never actually took legal control of Brooks Construction. He just acted like he did. According to these documents, Eleanor, you retain 60% ownership of Brooks Construction. Not only are you his primary benefactor, but you are the majority owner of his own company. The weight of that revelation settled over me, heavy and cold. Ethan, my son, had presented the majority owner of Brooks Construction with a $5 silk flower, while showering a diamond on his mother-in-law. The insult suddenly felt less personal, and more like a profound act of corporate disrespect. George then slid a thick binder across the table. Now, let's look at the company's financial records since Ethan took the helm, particularly over the last 6 months. He flipped through pages, pointing to various line items. There's been a dramatic increase in spending, Eleanor. Much of it categorized under executive entertainment and consulting fees. He tapped a finger on a line item, $12,000 in 3 months alone. This includes, if my sources are correct, the diamond ring for Sylvia, Ethan, and Victoria's recent anniversary getaway to that resort in the Keys, and a string of lavish dinners with Victoria's old business school friends, who also happen to be these consultants you mentioned. A sickening knot tightened in my stomach. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. Ethan wasn't just being disrespectful. He was using company funds, my company's funds, for personal expenses and to curry favor with Victoria's family and connections. The casual disregard for financial prudence was shocking. At this rate, George warned, his voice grave, Brooks Construction will be in serious financial trouble within 6 months, maybe less. They're bleeding cash. Eleanor, fast. The betrayal cut deeper than any snubs at a party. It was a betrayal of my lifelong sacrifices, of my trust, of the legacy I had fought so hard to preserve. My son was running the company into the ground, all while basking in a false sense of ownership and squandering its resources. Then, George leaned forward, his voice dropping. There's one more thing, Eleanor. I received an anonymous inquiry this morning from a business broker. Someone is actively inquiring about the valuation and potential sale of Brooks Construction. My breath caught in my throat. Sell it? Without consulting me? Without even a whisper of a discussion with the true majority owner? It was a cold, calculating move. Intended to strip me of everything. The silk flower, the dismissal, the financial mismanagement, it all converged into one devastating realization. They weren't just pushing me aside. They were trying to erase me completely. But then, a different feeling surged through me, powerful and unfamiliar after so many years of quiet resignation. It wasn't anger, not entirely. It was a cold, righteous fury, coupled with a fierce determination. I sat up straighter, my gaze meeting George's. George, I said, using his full name for the first time in years, the old, familiar formality adding weight to my words. I want to call a board meeting. This week. Immediately, for the first time in what felt like decades, I felt powerful. Truly, undeniably powerful. The story is far from over, and the confrontation is just beginning. If you're gripped by this tale of betrayal and reclaiming what's rightfully mine, please hit like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to make sure you don't miss a single twist. I dialed Ethan's number, my fingers steady. Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice chirpy. Oh, Eleanor. What a lovely surprise. Ethan's in a very important meeting right now, darling. Can I take a message? Her attempts to deflect were transparent, a flimsy shield. Victoria, I said, my voice calm, this isn't a social call. I need to speak with Ethan about business. Immediately, the shift in my tone must have registered, because after a beat of surprised silence, she relented, putting him on the line with a noticeably cooler demeanor. Mom, everything okay? Ethan sounded harried, already on the defensive. "No, Ethan, everything is not okay," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Thursday afternoon, at 2 o'clock, in the main conference room. This isn't a request, it's an instruction. As the majority shareholder of Brooks Construction, I'm calling an emergency board meeting, and your attendance is mandatory." A stunned silence stretched between us. Then, Ethan stammered, "Majority shareholder? Mom, what are you talking about?" I said, a cold certainty in my voice. "It's time we had a proper conversation about how this company actually works, and who truly owns it." I hung up, leaving him to process the bombshell. Thursday afternoon arrived with a crisp, autumn chill. I chose a tailored navy suit, a classic white blouse, and my sensible heels. I didn't want to look like a mother or a homemaker. I wanted to look like a businesswoman, a formidable owner reclaiming her domain. As I drove to the Brooks Construction office, the building no longer felt like Ethan's. It felt like mine. The glass facade, the bustling lobby. These were extensions of my legacy, bought with my sweat and sacrifice. George was already there, waiting for me in the conference room, the stacks of documents neatly arranged before him. Ethan and Victoria arrived a few minutes later, their faces a mixture of confusion and irritation. Ethan's gaze immediately fell on George. "George, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice edged with suspicion. "This isn't a family discussion, Ethan," I said, my voice firm. "This is a business meeting between partners. George is here as my legal counsel." George began without preamble, his voice measured. "Let's start with the company's ownership structure." He projected a scanned copy of the original incorporation papers onto the screen, then the divorce settlement. Ethan's initial confusion slowly morphed into a look of dawning panic as he saw my name clearly listed, followed by the definitive transfer of Arthur's shares. 60%. Eleanor Brooks. "That's correct, Ethan," I stated, my gaze steady on his. "I've been the majority owner of Brooks Construction since your father left. For over 35 years, Victoria snatched the papers from the table, her eyes scanning the documents frantically. But you retired, Eleanor. You stepped away. You gave Ethan control." Her voice was sharp, accusing. I stepped back from daily operations. "Victoria," I corrected her, my voice betraying no emotion. "I never retired from ownership. There's a significant difference." George then presented the financial review, a detailed breakdown of the company's expenditures over the past 6 months. He highlighted the line items that had caught my eye. "Ethan," I interjected, pointing to a specific transaction. "Perhaps you can explain this $1,700 dinner expense? Or the $3,000 stay at the Ritz-Carlton in Florida? And of course, the $7,000 jewelry purchase, itemized as client entertainment?" Ethan stammered. "Those were all business expenses, Mom. Important networking. Client relations," George calmly intervened. "My review indicates that the client entertainment in question included only immediate family members, Ethan, Victoria, and on one occasion, Sylvia Hayes." Victoria, ever quick to defend, piped up. "The ring for my mother was an investment in relationships, Eleanor. Her wisdom is invaluable to the company," George cut in smoothly. "With all due respect, Miss Hayes, your mother holds no official role, nor is she a compensated consultant or shareholder within Brooks Construction." I raised a hand, interrupting Ethan's sputtering excuses. "George, please show them the full financial analysis." The projections. The screen changed, displaying stark red numbers. "In the past 6 months," George explained, "expenditures have increased by 40%, while revenue has remained flat. Furthermore, the $50,000 loan provided by Eleanor Brooks is almost entirely depleted. At this rate, Brooks Construction will be insolvent within 4 months. That's impossible." Victoria snapped, her face paling. "No." "Victoria," I countered, my voice chillingly calm. "It's entirely possible. Revenue is actually down 12% from last year. A direct result of these modern business practices and invaluable wisdom that has cost us so much. This isn't investment, it's mismanagement. Victoria pushed back her chair, attempting to stand. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving. Sit down, Victoria, I commanded, my voice resonating with an authority I hadn't known I possessed. She froze, a flicker of surprise and fear in her eyes, then slowly sank back into her seat. This meeting, I continued, isn't over. I laid down the new rules, my voice clear and deliberate. Effective immediately, all expenditures over $500 will require my direct approval. All company credit cards are suspended, effective today. Any personal charges found on company accounts will be reimbursed directly from your personal funds, with interest. Ethan looked at me, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. Are you taking the company away from me? I'm not taking anything away from you, Ethan, I said, my gaze softening slightly, but my resolve holding firm. I'm taking back what was always mine. What I fought to keep alive for you, what you have carelessly squandered. Victoria, recovering her composure, threatened. We'll see about that. My family has connections. We'll pursue legal action. George merely smiled thinly. I'll be representing Eleanor Brooks, should that become necessary. I turned back to Ethan. You gave me a $5 silk flower, I reminded him, my voice devoid of warmth, while spending $7,000 company dollars on jewelry for someone else's mother, someone with no official stake in this company. That, I said, letting the words hang in the air, tells me everything I need to know about how you value my contributions, my sacrifices, my trust. Victoria made another move to leave, her face flushed with anger, muttering something about emotional abuse. But Ethan remained, slumped in his chair, staring at the floor. You have a chance, Ethan, I continued, to prove that you can run a business responsibly, to prove that you can show respect, not just to me, but to the legacy of this company. George will be resuming active oversight of all company financials starting Monday morning. You will report to him. Victoria exploded, slamming her hand on the table. You're destroying everything Ethan has built. You're ruining his career. My gaze sharpened, fixing on her. Ethan built this company, I said. My final words for the meeting. With my money, my sacrifice, and my trust. If it gets destroyed, Victoria, it won't be because I held him accountable. It will be because you both allowed it to happen. The first week of my direct oversight at Brooks Construction was marked by an eerie quiet. Ethan was present, dutifully going through the motions, attending meetings with George, and making sure all expenditures were reported. He was professional, even polite. But beneath the veneer, he was hollow. His eyes held a distant, wounded look, and his usual vibrant energy had been replaced by a heavy sullenness. It hurt to see, a dull ache that lingered despite my resolve. But I knew I couldn't waver. Not now. Then, Victoria called. Her voice, usually so composed, was syrupy sweet, dripping with a false concern that set my teeth on edge. Eleanor, darling, she cooed. I was hoping we could talk. Just woman to woman. About all of this. I kept my voice even. What is there to discuss, Victoria? Well, she sighed dramatically. Ethan is absolutely devastated. This whole takeover, as he sees it, has really affected his self-esteem. You know how sensitive he is. He's struggling, Eleanor. Really struggling. I allowed myself a small, humorless smile. Ethan's self-esteem isn't my responsibility, Victoria. His performance as a business manager, however, most certainly is. She bristled slightly, the sweetness beginning to curdle. But you're just so conservative, so afraid of risk. You can't expect a modern business to thrive by clinging to old ways. A $7,000 diamond ring for someone who isn't even an employee isn't a business risk. Victoria, I countered. It's a frivolous expenditure that contributed to the near insolvency of my company. But you've proven your point, haven't you? She pressed, her voice regaining some of its persuasive power. You've shown him who's boss. Now, why don't you step back again? Let him get back to building the business. He needs to lead, Eleanor. Not be micromanaged by someone who's stuck in the past. A cold certainty settled over me. She was trying to manipulate me, to get me to relinquish control, to return to my silent, invisible role. And what? I asked. My voice dangerously soft. If I refuse, the sweetness evaporated instantly, replaced by a brittle edge. Then you're going to destroy your relationship with your son permanently, Eleanor. He has options, you know. He's a talented man. Other companies would jump at the chance to have him, where he wouldn't have to answer to someone who's stuck in the past. Constantly breathing down his neck, the veiled threat, the implication that Ethan would simply walk away, leaving me with the failing business, struck a nerve. But not the one she intended. If Ethan chooses to leave, I replied, my voice calm, almost detached. He will leave with nothing but his education and his potential. Brooks Construction, the company he thinks he built, is legally mine. He has no equity, no stock options, no golden parachute. If he walks away, Victoria, he starts from scratch. Is that truly what you want for him? There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, then a click as Victoria hung up. Her mask had completely slipped. The battle, I realized, was about to escalate. The next Monday, George called me. Eleanor, he began, his voice serious. Ethan and Victoria have retained an attorney. A rather aggressive one. From what I gather, a weary sigh escaped me. I had expected this, of course, but the reality still landed with a thud. What are their demands? They are challenging your authority, Eleanor, he informed me. They're claiming undue influences, and I'm afraid, questioning your mental competence to manage a business. A deep weariness washed over me. A profound sadness that my own son would stoop to such a tactic. Mental competence? I echoed, the words tasting like ash. After everything, George quickly reassured me. Don't worry, Eleanor. We have all the documentation we need to refute those claims. Your clear-headed decision-making, your decades of meticulous record-keeping, the demonstrable business reasons for your intervention, and the irrefutable evidence of their financial mismanagement. It's all there. Is there anything else? I asked, bracing myself. They're also requesting immediate injunctive relief, he continued, to prevent you from making any major changes to the company's structure or operations until their claims can be heard. I ended the call and immediately dialed my older sister, Beatrice. Beatrice had always been my rock, my voice of reason. She listened quietly as I explained everything. Her silence a steady presence. Eleanor, she said eventually, her voice grave. Are you prepared for this to get uglier? For them to drag your name through the mud? To air all this in court? What choice do I have, Bea? I asked, my voice tight. Are you ready, she pressed, for Ethan, your son, to stand up in a courtroom and testify that you're incompetent, that you're not fit to make decisions, that you're stuck in the past? Her words hit harder than any of Victoria's threats. The image of the little boy I had raised, the one I had sacrificed everything for, now publicly denouncing me, cut me to the core. A tremor ran through me. For a moment, a fleeting, painful moment, I considered retreating, letting it all go. The company, the money, the principal. Was it worth destroying what little remained of my relationship with my son? But then, the faces flashed through my mind. Arthur's dismissive note, Ethan's casual acceptance of my life savings, Victoria's contemptuous, quaint, the silk flower, the diamond ring, the outright theft and mismanagement. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice. It was about the legacy of a company I had saved. It was about standing up for myself after a lifetime of quiet sacrifice. I straightened my shoulders, a renewed resolve hardening my gaze. If he wants to fight me, Bea, I said, my voice now steady and unwavering, then I'll show him what real strength looks like. I'll show him what happens when you underestimate the woman who built you. The legal battle commenced 2 weeks later. A sterile, brutal affair played out in a hushed courtroom. Ethan and Victoria's attorney, a sleek, sharp-suited woman, wasted no time painting me as a bitter old woman, clinging desperately to a company she no longer understood, hindering the progress of her bright, ambitious son. The accusations of undue influence and questionable mental competence were flung with casual cruelty, designed to wound and discredit. But George, my steadfast attorney, was meticulously prepared. He presented a mountain of evidence, pristine financial records demonstrating my decades of prudent management, followed by the stark contrast of Ethan and Victoria's erratic spending. He laid bare the documentation of personal purchases masquerading as business expenses, the inflated consulting fees paid to Victoria's friends. He had even secured testimony from several long-term employees who spoke quietly of the shifting company culture, the loss of morale, and the casual dismissal of their years of experience. The most damaging evidence, however, came from Brenda, the company's long-suffering bookkeeper. A quiet woman who had worked for Brooks Construction since Arthur's time, Brenda had seen everything unfold. Unbeknownst to Ethan and Victoria, she had privately, methodically, kept her own set of records, noting every questionable transaction, every unsettling conversation. She testified, her voice trembling but firm, about how Victoria had consistently pressured Ethan into extravagant, unnecessary purchases, framing them as business necessities for modernizing the brand. Brenda then produced documentation of emails and internal memos where Victoria explicitly suggested that Eleanor needed to be managed out of involvement, her influence deemed a hindrance to their vision. But the real bombshell was a recorded phone call Brenda had prudently and legally preserved. It was Victoria's voice, clear and chilling, discussing plans to buy her out at below market value, bragging about how easy it would be to acquire my shares. Ethan's inheritance is being stolen by an old woman who doesn't understand modern business, Victoria had said, her voice dripping with contempt. Listening to Brenda's testimony, particularly that recording, something inside me broke. It wasn't just mismanagement or disrespect. It was a calculated, insidious plan to steal my life's work, my legacy, and everything I had built. The pain was sharp, but it solidified my resolve, turning my hurt into a cold, fierce anger. During his own testimony, Ethan was a wreck. When asked to provide specific examples of my supposed mental incompetence or poor business judgment, he stumbled, contradicted himself, and looked desperately to Victoria for cues. He couldn't articulate a single instance where my decisions had genuinely harmed the business. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with piercing eyes, finally pressed him directly. "Mr. Brooks," she asked, her voice cutting through the tense silence, "in all the years your mother has been involved with Brooks Construction, including her periods of direct management, has she ever made any decisions that have demonstrably harmed the business?" Ethan looked down, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. The silence stretched, an eternity filled with the weight of expectation. Finally, he whispered, barely audible, "No." That single word sealed their fate. Within an hour, the judge returned with her ruling. She confirmed my full authority as the majority shareholder, dismissing Ethan and Victoria's claims of undue influence and mental incompetence as unfounded. She also sternly noted the extensive financial mismanagement evident in the company's records under Ethan's recent leadership. The injunctive relief they had sought was denied. My control was absolute. Walking out of the courtroom, the crisp autumn air did little to clear the cloud hanging over me. I had won, but there was no joy, no sense of triumph, only a profound hollowness. I had won the legal battle, but I had lost something irreplaceable. The vision of the son I thought I had. The unconditional love I believed we shared. "Mom! Wait!" Ethan's voice, hoarse and tearful, cut through the quiet. He caught up to me in the deserted hallway, his face streaked with tears, his once proud bearing utterly defeated. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to go this far." I stopped, turning to face him. The man standing before me was not the ambitious, self-assured son I had known, but a broken boy, stripped bare of his arrogance. My heart ached, a familiar pang of maternal love, but it was now tainted with the bitter taste of betrayal. "You saw me as the enemy, Ethan," I said, my voice low, filled with an exhaustion that went bone deep. "You let her convince you I was a threat to your inheritance." That hurts, Ethan, more than you could ever know. He nodded, wiping furiously at his eyes. I know. I made a lot of mistakes, Mom. A lot of stupid mistakes. The urge to hug him, to comfort him as I had done countless times throughout his life, was almost overwhelming. My arms ached with it. But then I remembered Brenda's testimony, Victoria's calculating voice, the silk flower, the diamond ring. I remembered the years of subtle slights, the dismissal, the slow erosion of my worth, and I realized, with a chilling clarity, that love without respect was just enabling. It was a weakness they had exploited, and I wouldn't let it happen again. I kept my distance, my expression neutral. This was not the end, but a new beginning. A path he had chosen. 6 months after the judge's ruling, I sat in my new Lakeview office, a space filled with soft light and the scent of fresh pine. The victory in court had been decisive, but the aftermath for Brooks Construction felt less clear. The company, once the bedrock of my family's dreams, felt tainted. Its once warm core replaced by a chill born of betrayal and greed. I made the difficult decision to sell it. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about severing the last cord to a past that had brought so much pain. The buyer was a larger, regional construction firm, eager to expand its footprint. They offered more than I had dared to hope. A sum that secured my future comfortably and, significantly, allowed me to set aside a substantial sum for Ethan. A silent, unspoken acknowledgement of the legacy he believed he was owed. Ethan, once he learned of the sale, was predictably stunned. But Mom, why? He'd asked, his voice laced with confusion. We could have fixed it. We could have rebuilt. It's time, Ethan, I replied, my voice calm, resolute. Time for both of us to start fresh. Brooks Construction fulfilled its purpose for me. Now, it's time for a new chapter. The finalization of the sale took 3 months, a period during which Ethan and I, surprisingly, worked together with a newfound, if cautious, harmony. Victoria, whose involvement had been severely curtailed by the court's ruling and her own diminishing interest once the inheritance seemed less assured, had grown conspicuously distant. During those weeks, I saw glimpses of the son I had raised, flashes of his intelligence and dedication, before Victoria's influence had clouded his judgment. Yet, the betrayal still colored our interactions. A phantom limb ache in the relationship. On the last day, after the papers were signed and the company officially transferred, Ethan looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I'm going to live, Ethan, I told him, a small, genuine smile touching my lips. Really live. For the first time in decades, and I did. I bought a small, charming lakefront cottage, tucked away from the bustle of the city. I furnished it carefully, each piece chosen for comfort and joy, not utility or obligation. For the first time, every decision I made was based solely on my own happiness, my own peace. I discovered new passions, volunteering at the Historical Society, taking pottery classes, planning audacious travel adventures. I felt a serenity I hadn't known was possible, a lightness of being that was utterly liberating. Ethan called occasionally, his updates on his job search always a little awkward, a little unsure. Victoria was notably absent from these conversations. My sister, Beatrice, ever the vigilant observer, kept me gently informed. Their marriage is struggling, Eleanor, she reported one afternoon. Turns out, without the promise of a company to inherit, Victoria's found other interests. I felt a pang of sorrow for Ethan, but it wasn't enough to make me rescue him again. He was living with the consequences of his choices, and for the first time, he had to face them head-on. Then, 8 months after the sale, he showed up at my cottage unannounced. It was pouring rain, and he stood on my porch, soaked to the bone, looking utterly miserable. Mom, he choked out, his voice raw. Victoria and I are getting divorced. He stumbled through the story. Her affair, his bitter realization that, when you don't have a company to inherit, you're not as attractive. The words, though self-pitying, held a kernel of truth that struck me. I watched him, my heart aching for the pain he was clearly in. I'm sorry you're hurting, Ethan, I said, my voice soft. But I'm not sorry you're learning what it feels like to be used, to be valued only for what you can provide. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, and finally, truly looked at me. I was horrible to you, Mom, he confessed, the words a raw whisper. Horrible. I let Victoria convince me that you were the problem, that you were holding me back. I took a deep breath. This was the moment for unvarnished truth. Yes, Ethan, I agreed directly, unflinchingly. You were horrible to me. Horrible. I listed his betrayals, not with anger, but with a quiet, undeniable conviction. The $5 flower, the court challenge, the cold, calculated plan to steal my life's work. Those weren't mistakes, Ethan, I said, my gaze steady. Those were choices. And you chose to betray me. He hung his head, silent tears falling. Can you ever forgive me? He asked, his voice barely audible. I paused, considering my answer carefully. I can forgive you, Ethan, I finally said. But I can't forget what you're capable of. Our relationship, if there is to be one, will be different now. You will have to earn my trust again. And that will take time. Years. Probably. I fixed him with a serious look. And if you ever treat me the way you did, if you ever disrespect me or take me for granted again, I will walk away permanently. He accepted my terms, tears still falling, but with a new sense of humility. He promised to earn my trust, to get a job, to support himself, and over the coming months, he slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt his life. He took a significant pay cut, working his way up in a smaller firm, developing a new, more respectful relationship with me, built on honest communication, rather than expectation. A year later, on my 66th birthday, Ethan showed up at my cottage door. He wasn't soaked, and he wasn't miserable. He was sober, dressed neatly, and in his hands was a bouquet of genuinely beautiful, fresh flowers. Not out of obligation, I sensed, but genuine desire. I felt a cautious respect for him, a fragile hope for our future. As I arranged the flowers in a vase, their vibrant colors reflecting in the lake outside my window, a profound realization washed over me. I was genuinely happy. Free from the expectations of others, free from the need to prove my value through constant sacrifice, free from the fear of setting boundaries. In losing him, the entitled son he had become, I had found myself. My worth, I knew now, no longer depended on anyone else's approval, on any company, or any relationship. It simply was.